Many of you have been to college. Some of you are probably planning to go to college. Some of you may be in college. The point is that most of us have a little bit of that college experience. And as you well know, in college you go to a lot of meetings and functions and things around campus that are planned, formally and informally. Well, imagine this scenario. Imagine that you go to a meeting. It's a political meeting of some type. You're not really sure. You're just going because your friends are going. And you go just to have a good time. It's got some silly name like Feeding the Poor Across the World. You don't really remember because you were just going for fun. Just going with your friends. But let's say a decade later, 15 years later, somebody brings up that meeting again. Not only just any somebody, but a government official brings up that meeting again and says that meeting was a meeting of subversives. People who are working against the United States of America. And now you are one of those people. You are subversive because you went to that meeting. A meeting you don't really remember. A meeting you only went to for fun. Maybe you even went to this club's meetings twice, but neither time did you pay attention. But now you are accused. You are guilty by association. You are a bad person working against the United States because of this meeting. Does that sound outlandish to you? Outrageous? Maybe not so much. Today I'm going to talk about the second Red Scare post-World War II. The one that most people remember, the tremendous one. And this is the kind of thing that took place in those days. Just to let you know, it wasn't a pretty time. After World War II, a committee that had been formed before the war really came to prominence, the HUAC, the House on Un-American Activities Committee. Now this committee had been formed to sort of root out subversives. It had been looked for those who committed treason before World War II and during. However, after the war, its tenor changed quite a bit and moved on to being a communist hunting committee. You see, the world had been split after World War II between the free world, led by the United States and NATO, and the communist world, led by the USSR and the Warsaw Pact. Now these two sides split up the world, and the United States was determined not to have any of those dirty communists in their country. So the HUAC was supposed to find all the communists, round them up, and put them in prison. Well, at least that was the public perception. It wasn't necessarily what the committee was actually supposed to do. But politicians quickly found they could become very popular looking for communists. Now there's a couple of politicians in particular that really made their name during this period. One was Richard Milhous Nixon. Yes, that's right. Future President Richard Nixon became prominent because he helped hunt out one of the most prominent communist spies of all time, Alger Hiss. Now there was some question over the decades whether Hiss was actually a spy, but Nixon definitely made his name proving he was a spy, and it's come out that Hiss probably was a spy. So yeah, they kind of got that one right. Hiss actually was a spy, and Nixon was part of the team that got him. It pushed Nixon all the way up to the position of vice president in 1952. Now the other one that we need to talk about is Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy was a congressman and an adamant anti-communist from a very conservative district. He was rabidly anti-communist to the point of making outlandish stories up and holding pointless trials and committees and forcing people to confess to things they just quite frankly weren't guilty of. McCarthy was a monster in many ways, but a monster pushed forward by the country because people were afraid of communists, and McCarthy claimed to know where they all were at. He claimed to have lists of people in the State Department, the War Department, the Army, all sorts of places where communists were residing, embedding, and destroying the United States. Most of this probably wasn't true because he never actually produced these lists for the most part. And many of the people he claimed were guilty just quite frankly weren't. Eventually McCarthy did fall in prominence and fell into alcoholism and eventually his own death, because even the United States got a little bit tired of his act. It was just a little over-aggressive and a little bit too much of a bullying act. In the meantime, though, he did cause a lot of damage to a lot of people. McCarthy represented the most paranoid and destructive forces within the United States. Xenophobia, fear of the other, anything that was different, and communism was certainly different in the United States at this point, and McCarthy represented all of that. Luckily, he didn't last forever. Though Nixon and McCarthy were two of the more well-known politicians to go after the communists, there were several others who made their names by going after communism. Now, it's hard to pick out every last one of them because there were a lot of them who found this very politically advantageous. I mean, it was an easy deal, right? You point to someone, say they're a communist, and you instantly become popular, especially if you're from one of the more conservative districts at the time. And honestly, finding people who were on the left wasn't really very hard, or finding people who were associated with the left wasn't very hard. Remember this period, the late 1940s that we're talking about, the early 50s. The people who were now in power were people who had grown up in the 1930s. And the 1930s was the Great Depression. The Great Depression had fomented a lot of political extremism. We talk about National Socialism, the far right wing, Nazism. Well, there was some of that right here in the United States. There was a famous Detroit priest named Coughlin who advocated government like this. He was actually a fan of Hitler and said so. And he had fans, he had followers. So yeah, there was far right thoughts in the United States. There were also far left thoughts in the United States. There was actual communism here in the United States. There was a communist party that said, hey, look at the Russians. During the Great Depression, the Soviet Union didn't suffer the setbacks that the rest of the world did. Now, in retrospect, it's because their economy wasn't very good and they had nowhere to go but up. And so really falling behind with the rest of the industrialized world was not really going to happen for them. So there are many people, though, who saw this as a good thing and said, see, communism works. And so there were left-wingers, or people who supported left-wing causes. And remember, not everybody who was accused of communism post-World War II was actually a communist. Some of them were just simply socialists, or, left-wingers, which have always been prominent in the United States. There's always been a left side to our political spectrum. And so anybody who was on that side was accused. And it destroyed lives, destroyed careers. The Intelligence Department, the department that knew a lot about Asia and the Middle East, that would have served the United States very well during this period, was basically stripped of a lot of their experts because they all happened to be left-wing political thinkers. A lot of socialists. Well, they were FDR people, New Deal people. They were left-wingers, a lot of them. And they fell away. Their careers were destroyed. Their lives were destroyed in some instances. Some committed suicide. Some were put in prison. There was even some death by execution. That was, save for a few that brought more legitimate spies like the Rosenbergs. But the point is that this was a very destructive monster. This Red Scare became a monster unto itself. It was eating away at the very national foundation of trust and political freedom and speech. In the United States, we say anybody can say anything they want about politics, short of a threat, short of an actual threat against somebody. If I wish to say I was a communist right now, here on this camera, I should be perfectly allowed to do that. Mind you, I don't think I am a communist. I'm not a communist, but I should be allowed to say that. You should be allowed to say that. Anybody should be allowed to have any communist thoughts. But in this period, the United States stopped such thoughts. Now, I talked about my last video, the first Red Scare, and I told about how the perceptions of communism have been colored. This carried over to an extreme amount after World War II, with the world being pitted into two sides, democracy and communism. Like they were two sides of a coin. The world was more complicated than that, but that's how a lot of people saw it. And after World War II, there was another little conservative backlash. I talked about the small conservative backlash of the First World War. People wanted to be back to normal. They wanted to be in a world that made sense to them. So it's easy to polarize in a world that you want to make sense. So that's how we got this diametric opposition of communism versus democracy. And if you were on the communist side, you were wrong, and that's all there was to it. Went before the HUAC, and they browbeated you and let you know what a bad person you were. Of course, famously, they ruined careers in Hollywood and other industries, of course, government, corporations. Very few places were untouched by this mass hysteria in the United States. Cross of Iron by Michael J. Hogan. Good book. It's about how the United States became a military state following World War II because of the Communist Scare. The Red Scare was a very destructive thing. It changed a lot of things about the United States. The Red Scare was a monster in its own right. It really did a number on us. So was there any silver lining to the Red Scare? Was there anything good that came out of it? Was there anything we can say positive about the Red Scare? Well, I guess we got some good art out of it. On the Waterfront was actually Eli Kazan's response to his actually turning other people in during the Red Scare in Hollywood. On the other hand, you have Arthur Miller's The Salem Witch Trials, which was actually a direct allegory for the communist witch hunts. It was a big witch hunt, and that's how a lot of people saw it. So, yeah, we got some art out of it. But a lot of artists' careers were shut down because of Zero Mostel, famous for The Producers. He lost probably 15 years of his career because he was branded a communist during this period. So, yeah, the silver linings are light and meek. I guess for me, the silver lining, hopefully, is this, that we learn a lesson. Prosecuting people for beliefs in the United States has negative consequences, is mostly destructive, and does very little good for anybody. There's so little good to say about the Red Scare now in retrospect. It was a reaction. It was a jerk of the knee. A jerk of the knee that gave us our own black eye. That's how bad a jerk of the knee it was. So next time you think about judging something or somebody just because of a belief or a thought, think about it again. Try to decide, are they free to have that thought? Is that thought a thought that is maybe well thought out? Maybe a thought that they deserve to have? You don't have to agree with the thought, but pushing them for that thought may not be the right decision. In fact, it's probably the wrong decision. I hope that gives you just a little bit of historical perspective.